Thank you.
Hold on, I have to say this. Got it?
I'm ready, Mr. DeMille.
Yeah, you're on.
Hello, everybody. Happy Sunday. Happy Sunday. Good to see you all. I'm so grateful to be here. We all good?
There we go.
Okay. Don't worry, there's a lot of photoshopping that will occur after this. CGI. I'll look like George Clooney when it's all said and done. So thank you for having me. Thank you for welcoming me into your community once again. I also want a presence into this room, not just all of you here, but those that'll be watching the recordings, as well as those that we have lost. So I believe Bobby was the person who we just called. So I want to presence Bobby. I want to presence all those that are our teachers, our beloveds that are no longer with us, and open up this community of consciousness because they've been here all along. And so I dedicate this to my Aunt Wendy, who I lost as well, and a student named Howard, who I lost last week. And I presence their name, and I invite you to presence the names of your beloveds, whether in your hearts or out loud. Consciousness. I wondered deeply about this topic, especially in the context of what I just shared. And I was struck by its bigness and its smallness. I started at some point about my consciousness, like what is the quality of my consciousness, as if it is something I can encapsulate in some sort of separate unit that is me, that is I, that is separate. And that seems so insufficient, but we have to talk about it. And then there's this huge consciousness that is a kind of short circuit. I don't know about you, this all in all encompassing, all knowing, ever present. And we get glimpses of it. I know I do moment by moment. And yet it's so big. It'd be like us just sitting here talking about what is God? What is the divine? And yet we know that there is this interplay at all times between the two. That the love we carry for our beloveds that are no longer with us, for each other, is, yes, within the personal and within the much greater picture, in the all in all. And I was just struck. Maybe consciousness I could wrestle with and think about it as perspective. That maybe it's not about what we know and when we know it, but from where are we situated? How are we showing up? What are we inviting in that's beyond what we think is in our head or what we know? But maybe it's about something else. That God itself is perspective. That grace is perspective. That greater consciousness is perspective. So to really get clear about what I mean about perspective, it is the zooming in and zooming out. It is the inviting in. It's the letting go. It's going within, because there is an innate inner wisdom that we all have. And it is also going without, like a community like this, like inviting our beloveds, our ancestors in. That each other is also perspective. That's probably the most salient rub, right? How we drive each other crazy with our perspectives, right? I love her, but God, she drives me nuts. But that's the lesson. That's the teacher. That we're all each other's teacher. Every name you've listed, every name you carry in your heart is your teacher. So to me, I just could not shake the idea that perspective and consciousness are inextricably linked. And we see this quite often. You fake it until you make it, right? That what you do shows up before sometimes what you believe. We were singing a song before. I didn't realize it. Smile though your heart is breaking. Smile even though it's aching. That you push through it. You live in the as if. And that's a perspective. And sometimes we quietly work inwardly and it shows up outwardly. And that's a sign of our consciousness, our perspective. And it's always an interplay of the two and everything in between. And yet it is always an invitation to bear witness, isn't it? Bear witness to ourselves, to each other, and how we show up. So I am very curious about a couple things. Yes, the quality of our thoughts, which we often talk about here, but their spaciousness, that perspective, that zooming out. What else are we allowing ourselves to see by zooming out, by stepping back, by not being so much in the middle of it, in the drama, in the minutia? How generous are our thoughts? Are they approaching life with a sense of curiosity, with play? I loved your opening prayer. You brought joy and humor into it. This can be fun. This can be fun. Can this be fun? That generosity of spirit shows up in so many different ways and shows up as lightness. And so these ideas of spaciousness and generosity just keep bringing me back to perspective. And I think about God through that lens of perspective. How perspective requires time. We kind of live life a little backwards. The lesson comes after the event. I'm not saying that's a bad backwards, but it's just a fun curiosity, right? It'd be nice to walk around with the lesson, the learning first, and then apply it. But not seen much of that myself. And perspective also comes from a sense of experience, from a sense of having to go through it, having to have held it, having to have your heart broken so that you could put it back together. And from that perspective and grace seem to me so linked. That there's some wisdom within us that says, step back. Just take a breath. Just see it differently. So consciousness, by another name to me, is perspective. Verse 16 of the Tao invites us to become totally empty. Quiet the restlessness of the mind, only then will you witness everything. Everything unfolding from emptiness. See all things dance and flourish in endless variation. And once again merge back into perfect emptiness, their true repose, their true nature. So my prayer for us is to invite perspective. That may be one of the many, many pathways to consciousness, greater consciousness, freeing, liberating consciousness, joyful, light, playful consciousness. And that comes often through listening, through stopping. We're so action biased, aren't we? Must do. Must do. And so the invitation is to go from this reaction that we are perhaps in the loop in. I know I find myself sometimes just reacting. What's the next thing? I'm going to react to it. To being in a place of responding, where we act from a place of responsibility, where we are first grounded in the truth of who we are, whose we are, that there's something greater working through us, that there's a greater perspective, a bigger picture, and that we move from there. There are cycles, the Tao says. Emerging, flourishing, dissolving, back again. This is the eternal process of return. Emerging, flourishing, dissolving, back again. The process of return. So returning to our true nature of generosity, care, love, the sparkle, the childlike joy of life, exploration. It moves in this cycle, does it not? Consciousness is always emerging. What is flourishing within us? I would say it is perspective, looking beyond what is right in front of us. And what is dissolving within us? What are we willing to let dissolve? I have a whole page here of things I'm willing to let dissolve, but I won't go through it with you. But we are really holding on, aren't we? Deeply attached to what we know. Deeply attached to it. It's comical sometimes. You ever gotten into like an argument with somebody and you're like, what was she or he thinking doing this, or this? And you find out, oh, it's because they had a flat tire that they didn't show up, not because they're so-and-so. Like some sort of left field reason that it happened. And it was not in your consciousness whatsoever that this was an option, was it? I know that might sound trivial, but we might be all living our lives like two ships in the night passing each other, based on our assumptions, based on some strongly held, preconceived notion that is really the opposite of freedom. That we have enchained, ensnared ourselves, our experience. Mark Twain is attributed to saying this. I'm not sure it's contested, but he said, it ain't what you know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure. That just ain't so. And ain't that the truth? So being right ain't so right. And so an invitation from perspective is to just keep letting it go. If you find yourself clenching, if you find yourself holding on to something for dear life, whatever works for you to make that happen, to let it go. Because your greatness, your freedom, your joy is right around the corner of just letting that go. And I know it's harder said than done. But I do find that humor is the greatest gift in those times. Look at me go. Here I go again. So, how we show up. What wolf we feed, as the Cherokee saying goes. That parable. Do we feed the wolf of resentment, anger, pride, jealousy, separation? Or do we feed the wolf of love and grace and compassion? And that lesson is often shortchanged because the real wisdom from the elders is that you feed them both right. And they both will win. So even in our expanded consciousness, our greater perspective, when you zoom out, it's not about starving one wolf for another. Because the starving wolf will come around again. There will be a ferocity to that starving wolf. That our compassion, our all in all, our greater consciousness, is encompassing of our littleness, our smallness. And that wolf needs love and care and tenderness too. Otherwise, we're just acting from that same place of starving, of separation, of denial. We must show up for it all. And we can show up for it all. I know it sounds overwhelming. I'm overwhelmed by it myself. But maybe that's the greatest fallacy, is that it's less overwhelming if we do show up for it all. It just seems like more work. But it is for our greatest good to show up for it all. So our consciousness is asking us to continually emerge. To emerge out of this shell of separation, out of this shell of withholding, of denial, and into a greater flourishing. Seek out. Be with each other. Enjoy each other. Spring is blossoming, but there's this inner blossoming that is always occurring. Bear witness to your blossoming and each other's. Even when we don't see it, as quiet and fallow and as greenless as those trees are out there, maybe in a week or two, we will have a completely different picture, and that is our experience too. There is so much going on beneath the surface. Zoom out. Back it up. There is so much more going on here. And one last thing about the dissolving. We often think of dissolving as losing, as more heartbreak. Emerging, flourishing, dissolving, back again, this is the eternal process of return. I would offer that dissolving is much more than that. That a good giggle is dissolving tension. That a good hug is dissolving separation. That a good act of kindness dissolves all of the difficulty of this world. That little things, like dissolved sandstone that make the beautiful beaches here, are just great, bountiful gifts. So keep your eye on the little things, because they make up the big things. And that's everything, isn't it? Become totally empty. Quiet the restlessness of the mind. So may we all slow down today, be with each other today, and witness the beauty, so much beauty today. So it is. Amen.